Last time we didn't finish our exercise. We were done with AWS Lambda, and now it's time to allow our static website access the Lambda. We'll use AWS API Gateway as a proxy. And if it goes smoothly, today we'll complete the exercise. This is what we ended up with: an UVPC in your Central 1 region with a private subnet in an availability zone A. This is you could configure in variables.tf. The key component is obviously AWS Lambda. That is VPC enabled now, or I would say bound to the private subnet. Binding the Lambda to the VPC enabled accessing the Elastic Cache cluster belonging to the same network. On the other hand, the S3 resource that never belongs to a VPC cluster became unavailable, and we had to introduce a gateway endpoint to allow our Lambda read quiz data from the S3 bucket. Now the question is, how do we reach out to the Lambda from static website in S3? Unfortunately, we can't route our requests from outside of the VPC directly to the Lambda. But luckily, there is a special resource that we're going to provide, and the resource is apparently AWS Lambda Gateway. In this video, we introduce this resource and complete our exercise. Now let's go back to our Terraform configuration and provide the gateway, but first let's check the resource definition on the Terraform official website. I'm going to check what resource I should provide for my REST API, not just for API gateway, but specifically for the configuration. The configuration that enables accessing my Lambda, in this case from the static website, but through API gateway. So the request would be AWS Terraform configuration for AWS, not for API gateway, div Lambda. I believe that's it. This link routes me to the Terraform official website, and I hope here I'll find an example of this resource AWS API Gateway configuration. And I believe this is the resource I need. This is API, AWS API Gateway REST API. Okay, will do. Let me go back and introduce the resource here. The resource file name doesn't make much sense for the Terraform, but for me it should be, say, AWS API Gateway TF. And I have the name and the description. I'll think about the description later. I only have one API gateway, so it's easy to distinguish because there is only one. Let it be quizless, because we call almost any resource as quizless. Dash API, because dashes are allowed, but underscores are not allowed in the resource name. But, as usual, the resource Terraform variable name, again, it's quite the opposite. Dashes are prohibited, but underscores are allowed. If I scroll down a bit, there is a resource section. The resource AWS API Gateway resource is something that identifies our quiz API. Because let's go back to the quiz and let's check how we defined in Fast API that we won't need any longer soon. How did we define the quiz endpoints? Here are the endpoints, but the endpoints are actually belonging to this root API router, and this API router we include in the application. We include it in the application somewhere here. Yes, we gave the router API prefix, but the prefix might be a bit more specific. If our application provides several APIs, not only for quizzes, but for user management as well, we would give the routers unique prefixes. And we would call different APIs by different prefixes. In this case, it would be /API, /quiz, /API, /user, etc. And in my case, there is no root resource, there is just API. But for the API gateway, we should provide something special. And I believe the prefix or the path part would be quiz. But I will start just from copying this resource and maybe this method as well, because I will need it soon. I will start from copying this data to our API gateway configuration. And of course, again, I'll start with renaming the resource. It's not proxy, it's a resource for our quiz, because the endpoint probably would be just quiz. It would be the prefix, something included in slashes. And here I would definitely refer to my API, to the resource I defined before. And I won't use this string template because I actually need just ID and I can use it directly like here. That's it. And also I need the root resource ID, and again this is the same API. I'm just adjusting this example provided in the Terraform official documentation to my case, to my naming. And that's it for the resource, but now we should decide on the method. To determine what method we need, we should go again back to the quiz implementation. We have Lambda somewhere here. It's here. And in the Lambda, what we have is one handler. And this handler receives the requests with full body and all the headers, but we don't use the headers, at least for now. And the request again contains the body, and this body is JSON mostly. Sometimes it's just one single value, but let's suppose it's always JSON. Maybe a scalar value is a kind of JSON as well. Like we need, for instance, for getting the quiz results. Quiz code is enough. And for some requests like get topics, we also don't need much data in the payload. We're just listing all the quiz topic without filtering, paging, etc. But again, for simplicity, I wouldn't implement numerous methods. We have one handler, and I'm gonna bind one handler to one method. And the method is post because mostly we need some data inside, some JSON data in the body. That's why I'm gonna first allow the post method only here. I don't need authorization for our quiz exercise, that's not required at all. And again, I'm referring to my API the same way I did before. And I'm referring to the resource that I defined just on the previous block. And the resource is Quizless API, not a proxy any longer. And I believe my integration is, oh, not sorry, there is no integration so far, it's just a gateway, and I believe my gateway is defined already. I probably would start from deploying this configuration and checking the not the backend, but the gateway on the server side. Terraform apply. I don't need a separate planning step. And let's see if it works. No, it doesn't. This resource, Quizless API, yes, line number 13, it's different. Okay, okay. Another attempt. So far, so good. Where do I have proxy? Oh no. Oh, I did something wrong and I want to get rid of this proxy because this name doesn't suit my needs. Naming isn't good throughout my project because, again, it's just an exercise, but having something that's called proxy is not an option for me as well. To address this problem, I'm going to rename this resource in the state. I could pick the name of the resource from the state with the command state list. No, Terraform state list, obviously. But I even don't need this list because I know the name of the resource and I can execute this command. I need the resource name. Again, it's all about the state. It's Terraform state MV, and this is the resource type, and this is the old resource name. This is the new resource name. The new resource name would be, let's say quiz method, quiz, or maybe quiz command method. Okay, in the state, the object is moved, is renamed, and I'm gonna go back. Oh, by the way, I wanna update the name here. And now I wanna go back to check what resources I have in the API gateway. Here is the API, and I need the resource. Okay, I have this resource quiz, it exists. Let me now apply my configuration to have my state equal to what we have on the server and to have this resource renamed as well. After I renamed the resource in the state. That's cool. Now they have the method. And now we can try integrate the Lambda function with this API gateway. This particular method quiz post should route us to the API, not to the API gateway, but to the Lambda function. But we probably need a bit more actions to allow this integration. We're already on this page for the serverless with AWS Lambda integration. And now I believe I need this resource to integrate finally my gateway and my Lambda. And again, I'll copy and paste, but this time I like to be a bit less inaccurate while naming. So let's start from giving the unique name. And the unique name is Quiz API because it's called this way, Quiz API integration. And for the Quiz API integration, again, I'm changing all the resources like I did before. I don't need these template strings. Instead, I'm copying the resource IDs, API IDs, and finally the method. And the method is here, but it's not proxy, it's quiz command method. And I believe that's the same HTTP method because the protocol is apparently HTTP. And the integration method is post. That's totally fine for me. And the type is AWS proxy. We decided once that we need the proxy integration. So what's next? The URI. And I need the URI of the Lambda function. But again, if I use this IRN, why do I use this template? There is nothing special about this variable. I could use it right here, but I should rename my Lambda, and that's easy. Where do I have it? I have this Lambda here. It's called Quizless Lambda. And I just renamed this example. And this integration is okay, but again, is always, I might be missing some special permissions. Almost for every AWS resource I provide, I need a special action, an extra special section to enable performing some operation. For instance, for Lambda function, I need special permissions for accessing the network, accessing S3. I apparently use a gateway endpoint, and accessing Redis. Let's see if there is a special permission for Redis. At least there is, yes, there is S3 Lambda policy attachment. So next thing I need for my API gateway is probably a special permission. Let's see if there is a hint for us on this website we explored before. Okay, so far no permission. There is something about matching empty path. Maybe that's not required for now. But, oh yes, there is a special permission resource for my Lambda function, and I will add it immediately. It's AWS Lambda permission, but the naming here is not right. Let it be allow API gateway. This is what it does. The naming is okay. Is not good. Yes, I know, but still. Now I need the function name. No template here required. And the Lambda function is definitely not an example, but Quizless Lambda. Cool. I believe the principle is a default one. I believe this is the way I should refer to the principle. I'm not changing this, as well as the action. It's also Lambda invoke function, as well as this statement. Statement says allow API gateway invocation. Might be. Let me check if it works. And finally, the resource I ran is my API. It's not example, but REST API, Quizless API. And now I definitely need this template string because I'm adding this wildcard to allow access for any method on any resource. And these wildcards should be here for my Lambda function in this source IRN string. And now I believe that's it, but let me see, maybe I'm missing something. I noticed this section about the deployment. And yes, now I see I'm actually, I can go further without API gateway deployment, and let me show you why. The deployment is kind of actual implementation of the API gateway. And until I deployed it, these methods are not accessible. If I check the resources, I check special actions here. I may add more methods, resources. I may manipulate cross-origin request sourcing, but there is a special extra action, and this action is deploy API. I need the deployment to unblock my request to the Lambda function, and I will go and add the deployment as I did previously. Most probably, I will again copy and paste this code for now. And of course, it's not an example deployment, but something more specific, let's say Quizless API deployment. I'm not sure, but let it be just quiz API deployment. And let's see what dependencies here I need. It depends on API gateway integration. Where do I have API gateway integration? Here is it. Here it is. And Lambda root. I'm not sure why it's called API Gateway Integration Lambda root. Probably that's not the name of the resource I declared, so let me leave it as this. And the Lambda API ID is definitely not example, but Quizless Lambda, Quizless API, no. And the stage name, I'm not sure. I don't like the idea of having stage in our exercise. Stages are not necessary, but let's call it sprod. Let's remove this template. And let's see if it works. So I'm trying to apply my configuration. Fingers crossed. Now, there is no such resource, API Gateway Integration Lambda. I'm not sure what resource is actually referred to here. Let's see. No, that's weird. Oh, there is a Lambda root integration as well, and there is this Lambda integration. Okay. It's just the name of the resource, nothing special. In the depends on section, after all, I'm constantly referring to the existing resources I provided. And in my case, it's integration that's called quiz API integration. Let me repeat. And now I just see I forgot something useful. Here in the outputs, I have website URL, and this website URL I can access directly by clicking on the link. But I need probably the very same API endpoint to test my AWS Gateway API, but before testing it, I could use the GUI of AWS, the website, to check if this API is enabled, if the integration with Lambda function is enabled as well. And I will start checking the AWS Lambda. And let's see our existing Lambda function. Does it have now more triggers? Because previously it was in the void. It wasn't connected to anything. I hope it is now. And yes, I see there is API gateway on the left on the trigger side. And if I update this API page, okay, can I test this now? I hope I can. Let me just press here on test. Let me provide with the simple query string. I believe that's quiz topics. I'm not sure if I need headers, but let me provide with the headers at least for the expected response type. Let's see, I had it in README, and the headers will be maybe just it. Maybe I don't need these headers at all. So if I press the test, what happened? Is it? No, it's 502. And what was the error? Let's see. Did my request get to the Lambda? The JSON object must be string byte, but not just known type. Okay, where do I provide body? Here it is, and test again. Now what's the result? Again 502. And what's the error now? Endpoint response body. Yes, the payload should contain requested. I'm sorry, I forgot completely about the payload. And actually, my query string is not required at all. I forgot the way we tested our Lambda now. Our Lambda before we went into cloud. So locally, I would provide this type of JSON. The body is a string, it's stringified. No, that's not required, I believe. This is something that we required for our tests in the Lambda GUI. But now let it be a regular body. It's ugly. I want to transform it, simplify a bit. And the body is simple. Requested operation is quiz topics. No more arguments are provided. So clumsy. Yes, that's it. Now, what would be the response when the body is correct? And the response is 200. So our Lambda works. Our API is accessible now. Through the API gateway to the Lambda, the request went a long way. And the response, let's see the response. The response is our topics. That's super fine. Let's check one more request, a bit more complex, but I don't see a reason why it shouldn't work. Let me be not so clumsy now. Oh, okay. What did I do wrong? Let me just use my IDE to replace all the occurrences of slash inverted double quote. No, I wanna replace only this. How do I confine my operation to the selection? Yes, this way. Okay, that's the body I'm gonna use for the test. Do I need these extra quotes? No, I don't need the body at all. This is the body of the request. There, that should be it. Requested operation plus the payload. And fingers crossed, this is our last test before we actually try the whole workflow from the website itself. And the response body, here it is, the status is 200. All is fine. But if I go back here, let's see if it's accurate. Yes, our API gateway actually does not belong to the private network. It's kind of outside of the VPC. At least it's not bound here. But the missing part is here. We actually are not referring to the API gateway from our static website. But let's see one thing I'm still missing in the configuration, and this is the output. And the output should include the, oh, the endpoint we just created. And this output will refer to, let's see what the value is. I believe to the deployment, not to the method, might be to the resource, but most probably to the deployment. And inside the deployment, I need to refer to the actual endpoint. So I would ask Google one more time. Let's see. Terraform API gateway deployment. It should be URL or should be endpoint or both. Let me ask. Let me check the deployment specification here. Somewhere here we should have properties. And this looks good to me. Invoke URL. The URL to invoke the API, pointing to the stage, in our case, to production. Let's edit and let's deploy again. Or let's see what happens if I just Terraform plan. I should get the output as well. And I don't need the auto approve. Okay. This endpoint will get eventually, and we should refer to this very endpoint in our static website. So I have to go to my website and I'll get my website. Let's see, it's inside the storage website, it's inside the JavaScript, and finally, this is server.js. And in server.js, we should use this URL, not the default one. But the question is, did we manage to know? We still have the old API specification contract on the JavaScript front-end side, and we are referring to different endpoints, not to the single endpoints that the Lambda or, in this case, API gateway provides. Instead, we should be executing different requests, and the request would look like, let me check it in the terminal. Let's say ix post, and this is the URL, and the endpoint is quiz. And now I have to specify the payload, even though the payload is simple, but I still need to provide it. Let's see what was my payload last time. Oh, it's a bit bulky. I'm gonna simplify this request, and probably I need an editor. This is the request payload. I need it compact. This is my old credentials. They don't exist any longer. Now, what request I have so far? Now I have to provide the headers, and this would be the data. The headers are content type is application JSON. I believe that's it. I'm not sure if I need the trailing slash, but let's have it. I don't need this. Yes, here is the response. It works. Now that I know it works, I have to reshape my frontend, and I have to update this server.js to reflect the fact that now we have a single web endpoint, and this endpoint is a post one. And in the request, we are providing the operation, not the way we did before, like we would append this to the base URL and have the specific get or post endpoint. Instead, our only endpoint is a post one. So we're going to use it this way. And we call this endpoint with different payload, and this payload always includes a requested operation. So instead of having this request like start quiz, etc., I will introduce a generic request, and this generic request would be, let me call it query server. And again, I need the payload and the operation, of course. This would be the requested operation. Probably I will need this on completion handler as well. So the final signature is operation, then the payload. And I don't have to change this URL. Instead, first I will create the payload object. It will be request payload. From what I have in the function arguments, payload. And this is, sorry, that's not plus. And this is requested operation again. What we have here, yes, requested operation and the payload. And we're gonna post this request to where? Where do I specify the URL? Yes, here, to the base URL. And the method is here, post body, that's request payload. We should stringify the body. Yes, I believe we should. The headers are here, and we'll check the status, and we'll execute the onCompleted handler. And finally, we have a special case, the error response processing method. So that's it. I will reuse this query solver method in all our class methods, starting from get quiz topics. So here we should simplify it a bit. For getting the quiz topic, we'll call query solver. This query solver, and our operation is, what's the operation? It's quiz topics, this one. And the payload might be empty object, and the onCompleted handler is here. And now my call for the server is much simpler than it was before. But now I see that I might need this old style server.js in case I'm gonna use and I'm gonna run my tests locally. So I will copy, I will paste it here, and I will call it for now server remote. And this JS, I'll revert all my changes. I have too many, I should commit soon. But let me first update my server. I would say undo my updates to the server. No, the path is wrong. Yes, because I'm at the wrong folder. And that is not about server remote, but just about server. Yes. Here my server is an old one. And what I'm changing now is a remote server. And now I don't need this local URL any longer. Instead, I would go and finish my quiz get topics request. And that's much simpler now. I'm going to do the same for the rest of the requests. And my job is trivial here. I believe that's just quiz start with onCompleted handler, but I also need extra data. This data actually, this is my payload. It's a bit too long. This is better. Signature is the same, but the actual body of the method is much simpler. I'll repeat this for the rest of the functions. For quiz schedule, what I have is this data, on completed handler again, and the URL is probably quiz schedule. One more request for joining the quiz. All is the same, except the actual data here. Oh, I was too fast while deleting, because I'm gonna copy and paste the payload from here. What's next? Posting the answer. We are close now. Maybe a couple more requests and that's it. The next one probably would be or either checking the quiz state or getting the quiz results. Yes, getting the quiz results. IAS post answer should be probably quiz answer endpoint. And joining the quiz would be quiz join. And getting the quiz results. Let me check if it's quiz results. I have my Lambda definition here. And I have all the functions mapped to yes. Quiz check status, quiz results. I'll check it all. And I don't need the payload here, I just need the quiz code. Maybe that's okay for me to provide just the quiz code. Let's see. If it doesn't work, I'll introduce JSON. I'll include it into an object. Where do I check the quiz state? This should be changed. This is not it. Check status? No. Check state? Yes. I haven't changed this. Okay. This should be simple. Again, I'm constantly losing, yes, quiz check status. My train of thoughts here. And I need this payload. And that's it. I don't know for now if it works or not, but we have 78 lines, 77 lines of code, and originally it was almost 2 times more. Let's check if our quiz works with the remote server now. And for this check, no, I don't have to run this. I don't have to run my website any longer, my local API. I'll be relying completely on the remote one that I'm addressing this way. And all I need is just to navigate to the index.html and again, still I'm missing something. Let me check my last request that worked. In my last request, I added a prefix to the API. What was the prefix? Yes, it's quiz. and I'm going to change this for quiz. Finally, I'm going to browse this index.html. And let's see, something's not going well because I don't see quizzes here. Let me refresh the page. What is wrong here? It's probably course. No? Again, it's localhost. Yes. Sorry, my fault. I should rename this resource to server local, and by default, I will be using this .js file. Why don't I see any request here? That's weird, because base is not defined here. Base.url. Oh, my fault. This is this.base URL. Okay, one more try. Failed to fetch. The endpoint is quiz. The request was payload is empty. Yes, it looks okay. Quiz topics. And what is the error? No. Let's see. I don't see the status of the request. It just tells me that no data was found. That's weird. Let me copy and paste this request as a CRL script. And let me run this script in the terminal. Oh, that much data I don't need. I don't need this compressed and data raw, etc. But okay, I'll simplify the request a bit. I want to identify the culprit who is not allowing me to get the response I need. This is close to my original request I tried previously. Okay, it returns some data, but if I try again the original request, it works as well. Probably this is all about the course. I haven't configured course, I haven't enabled, but let me try if I am able to make this simple operation here. What's wrong? There was an error while enabling the course, but let me repeat this request. Yes, I wasn't able to enable the course on the server side, on the AWS side. Instead, I'll try to do this in my configuration, and I would go to Terraform back, and I would apply this configuration one more time, and let's see if it helps me to run my website log. Let me go in Google how to enable course. Let's say Terraform API gateway, but not this. Enable course. Yes. Here is the module, and I will use this module. I will use it here next to the output after the resource definition. And let me be a bit more specific. API gateway enable course. This is the source of the model. By the way, the model is most likely resembles the file I have here on in any of Terraform file with .tf extension. This model will provide me with the required resources. I don't want to go deep inside the implementation. I just need the API identifier, and I have this. I defined it many times already. This is it, I believe. And the API resource. Where do I have the resource specification? Probably this one. And here is the resource ID. I hope that will be enough to enable course. But let me run my Terraform apply command. Auto approve. And let's see if course is enabled, because I was, oh, yes, I should run Terraform init because this is a new model I haven't installed yet. Let's see if it works, because for some reason I wasn't able to enable course, yes, through the GUI. I hope this will work. Probably this worked. This was fast. Now let me just repeat this request by updating the page, and apparently this didn't help. Now I see the status is course error. This is strange. Oh, I just ran Terraform init. Yeah, now I see why it was so fast. This is the actual command and it takes time. Yes, that's obvious. It actually creates several resources. That's why using the model was a good idea. Otherwise, I would create too many resources. Let me check what the conflict is. It says method already exists, and what the method is on line number 26 in main.tf. Ah, this is about this resource, okay. Probably I have some leftovers. AWS API gateway method with the name underscore. That's weird. Do I have some hidden methods here? Maybe it helps if I apply the refresh only option, because I'm gonna pick the changes, refresh, made on the or on the AWS side. I'm gonna pick the changes locally, and if some method, some resource already exists, let it be synchronized with the state. And now that the existing resource is synchronized and mapped on the state, I hope this time my Terraform apply would go up to the end. No, still there is a conflict. Okay, maybe the problem is I tried to enable course but failed, and now I'm gonna do the following. I'm gonna delete this resource completely, and I'm gonna delete this API. And next time I would run this Terraform apply command, I hope it will recreate both the API, the method, the integration, and enable course for me. because I feel that this course problem is the last one. Yes, now it works. I hope it works. Let me check the endpoint. Is it somewhat different? Yes, it was changed. I should reflect this here. But let's see if this course magic worked for me. I'm gonna update this quiz page one more time. And still there is a course error. That's weird. Let me play a bit with the URL. No luck. Let me check if the course is enabled here, if I can check it from the GUI. For the quiz, could I enable course? For some reason, this option is still here. I'm not sure, but again, I have the options request. And the options request kind of indicates, that course should be allowed now. Not so sure. But what options do I have as well? How do I test it? Okay, let me check the endpoint. The endpoint is updated. The status code is 200. But why it's red? I'm puzzled a bit. Where did I have this indication on the course error? What should I go and check next? What resource did I enable with course module? This is API Gateway Enable Course Resource. Not a good name, but still, it should have done this trick. Again, what I am enabling. This is the Quizless API ID, the REST API. Yeah, it looks okay. This is the resource, and the resource is the quiz resource we defined it earlier. Yeah, that's nice. Let me check the documentation for this model. Not this one, not this. Yes. I searched for the solution in the internet, and I also played around a bit, but I didn't find an indication of the root of the problem, why my post response does not contain origin headers, course headers. And for me, the answer was this small article on the official AWS website. And let's see what is, yes, it's here. What the article tells us about this particular problem with course support. I need these headers, but I missed them. And I have to enable them in a special way for Lambda integration, for AWS proxy integration. And this page says that you can return the headers you need, but you should do it yourself because the backend itself is responsible for returning the headers and not the API integration. So instead of trying to update my Terraform configuration like I did, instead of adding this module, I probably should better try it this way and here in the code add these headers And this is what I'm gonna do. Directly to the Lambda function here, I have my handler, and here I return status code body, but I will return headers as well. Of course, that's a hard-coded way, and I don't like it, but instead I would do the following. I will introduce another setting parameter, setting argument, and this settings is here. It's called, let's say, allowed origins. Let me be a bit more specific. Let it be this way. And the wildcard is the default value. But of course, I will change this value somewhere in the Lambda environment variables. Probably this is the expected way. There is no indication on this page about how should I provide these values, these hard-coded example com, but I believe environment variables is a good option. So now I need to use my settings in Lambda. And this one, this variable I just introduced, allowed origins. And I will still update my Lambda function. I will add one more environment variable here. The same value. Let me a bit beautify this section. Yeah, now it looks good for me. And I'm gonna deploy the Terraform configuration. But before, have almost forgotten to update my Lambda output. Is it Lambda output or Lambda source? Let me check. I have this file packlambda.sh, and this file would first copy the sources and second, yes, populate this Lambda output. And only then I will deploy my Terraform configuration. So for now, I will go one directory up. We'll run this pack lambda.sh. And the next thing is to apply my Terraform configuration. I will pause my video here because it always takes time. Done. Then, before checking my website, my static one, with the proper URL of the API gateway integration, I should update this endpoint. And it goes to server.js. Yes, fine. Now I'm gonna check how it works and finger crossed. And still the course error. That's weird. Now I'm gonna update with hard reload. And again, oh, and this is something new actually. There is 403 for the options request. That's strange because the last time it worked.